topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show. We definitely bring you the finest experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Hey, have you ever seen all those ads out there for, for asbestos, mesothelioma? Boy, I have a hard time pronouncing that word. But you see all these ads everywhere, and you wonder, what kind of cancer is that? Well, we have the finest attorney, plaintiff asbestos attorney, Michael Mandelbrot. And I got to tell you, we've done, this is, I believe, going to be our third show. And I have learned so much from this show. He's been voted the top 10 best among attorneys in mass torts by the American Legal Institute in 2024. And he's a longstanding member of the lawyer distinction for many years in asbestos and litigation. We welcome 30-year plaintiff asbestos attorney. When you see him, if you're watching TV today, you're going to think he was a little kid when he went into law. This welcome attorney Michael Mandelbrot. Good afternoon, attorney.
Well, thank you. I don't know that I've been referred to as being relatively, I don't know if you called me young. But nah, I had a lot more hair when I started. I can tell you that, Steve. But yeah, I've been doing this 30 years, and it's my pleasure to be here. And thank you very much.
Michael, the great thing about your show is we are inundated by commercials and with asbestos. What we are lucky is we have one of the finest attorneys. You've been doing this for a long time. Tell people about your background and your practice.
Well, of course, Steve, thank you very much. For literally since the day I became an attorney in 1994, even before, I've been working in asbestos litigation. My first job out of school was at a law firm local to me in Nevada, California, who had an asbestos practice where they represented victims of asbestos diseases and cancers. For about 5 years, I worked there, ultimately working my way up, where it was time to move off to another firm and ultimately on my own, representing victims of asbestos diseases and cancers. I have dedicated my career to these victims. And unlike many of the other attorneys out there also in this field, my office not only represents victims of mesothelioma, but we also represent victims of lung cancer, other cancers, digestive tract cancers caused by asbestos, and also victims of asbestosis, which is a very serious disease, oftentimes fatal. But many lawyers in my field, they won't handle those cases anymore because truthfully, they're not quite as valuable. They all want the mesothelioma and the lung cancer cases. And that's one of the reasons why you see those commercials on TV, which I myself at times also have some involvement in. Please excuse the phone. There we go. It should go to voicemail just right on that.
I didn't know if that was yours or mine.
Nah, that was mine, and I do apologize.
That's
for
okay.
That. And so just for the listeners, let me just do a quick rendition of what you see on TV. Notice there is $30 billion available to victims of mesothelioma and lung cancer. Don't miss your opportunity. These funds are running out. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call our office at 1-800-970-DUST. You may be entitled to significant compensation. We travel to you. No lawsuits necessary, and all cases are handled on a contingency. No fee unless we win.
Well, you got to tell that.
And those are the commercials. And truthfully, I advertise sometimes locally, but not nationally. You will see those ads 365 days a year on CNBC, CNN, oftentimes running on local cable all over the country. And the reason is because these cases are very, very valuable, especially the mesothelioma cases. I would just estimate that each mesothelioma case is probably worth at a minimum on average $2 million, but oftentimes far more. One very close firm that I work with had a $52 million verdict just this week. So the potential in these cases is huge, and it's really a big fight amongst the plaintiffs' asbestos lawyers to get these cases. The one thing, well, there's a few things that I will say real quickly, Steve, bother me about these commercials. And again, I have a commercial as well. 95% of these commercials are advertised by maybe 3 law firms from around the country. One of those lawyers, James Sokoloff.
Yes, I've heard his name.
You'll see him every single day. He spends millions of dollars a year. But what's crazy about it is he has never represented a victim of mesothelioma. Every case he has ever had has gone to one specific law firm. No matter where they live, no matter where they are, those cases, if he ultimately retained them, went to one law firm. And this is a very bad thing for asbestos victims because, one, this firm is located in one area of the country, and they may have a lot of evidence related to that area of the country. But if their client, for example, is located in California, maybe they open up a satellite office in California, but they don't have the evidence or the information to maximize the value of those cases. And so one of the big problems, or two of the problems, is one, oftentimes individuals are signing up with lawyers who don't actually represent them. These lawyers end up referring the case to another lawyer. So the lawyer you see on TV, you never meet with, you never talk to, and they aren't involved in your case. Second thing is, some of these firms have just grown so big that it is impossible to work up these cases. My firm makes a point of handling a limited number of mesothelioma and lung cancer cases each year. If we would be unable to handle too many, these cases take an incredible amount of investigation and workup, each one of them. And many of these firms who nationally advertise, they have hundreds of these cases with their goal, to settle with one defendant in 100 cases for what I consider to be a nominal amount, which is great for the law firm, but then each client ends up getting just a fraction of what they should get if their case is handled properly. So those are just two of the issues that I really see with the national advertising, but I've got to keep my toe in the water, I've got to compete, and I've got to keep advertising, even if I can't afford to have the broadcasting publication that these other firms have nationwide. I just have to stay involved and continue to compete with them.
And you know what, Michael? I don't think people realize the amount of investment you make before you realize one dime.
That, great, great point. Oftentimes these cases are an investment of, to take them to trial, probably close to $250,000 to $500,000 we spend out of pocket. We are always confident, though, that that money is going to come back in the resolution of the case, whether in settlements, bankruptcy trust fund settlements, or through trial. So what I tell people is, in 30 years, I have never sent a bill to a client, and I have never charged a client a dime out of their pocket. I don't even have a billing system. And that's one of the things that I really like about this is, yes, we do have to put up a lot of money in these cases because they are very expensive to litigate, to hire experts, to take depositions, to file the case, to serve the case. These things are incredibly expensive. Defendants all over the country. You're dealing with a lot of the top law firms in the country, but we're willing to take that risk on behalf of these clients because we're confident in our success. And most of our clients are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. They can't afford $500 for a case, yet alone $500,000. So we make a point of never making our clients reach into their pocket. These cases are always handled on a contingency. A client never sees a bill.
What was the movie that was done out in California with the, was it Bogdanovich? Was that her name?
Erin Brockovich?
Brockovich. Does that kind of what you do?
Absolutely. Very, very, very similar. You've got, in that case, I believe it was PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. But in this case, it's even a larger industry, the entire asbestos industry, harming, killing individuals, causing cancer, knowingly causing cancer to individuals through chemicals and other hazards, and really doing nothing about it until they're ultimately sued or litigated. And it's very, very incredibly similar. The very early cases of asbestos and mesothelioma were very, very similar to that movie. There was another movie, John Travolta starred in that one about 25 years ago. It was called, or about 20 years ago, it was called A Civil Action. And that one as well, incredibly similar, also involved toxic exposures, concealment of the hazards by the company. Very, very similar. I love both of those movies, as a matter of fact. And, if anyone really wants to get a feel for what we do, there is those two movies. But even more importantly, there is a book by his name is Paul Brodeur. He just passed away, Brodeur, I believe. And God, the name is escaping me right now. But it is all about asbestos. And I'll remember the name before this podcast is over. It is all about asbestos. And it really, it's like a documentary of the early cases of asbestos. And it is an incredible book.
I know there's someone right now watching or listening to the show going, how would I know if I have asbestos disease or mesothelioma? I mean, what do I look for?
Well, most people who typically are diagnosed, the first problems that they experience are breathing problems. Asbestos historically and traditionally affects the lungs. And, this is another unfortunate thing that I see is that anytime somebody with breathing problems goes to their local physician, typically the first thing that they ask is, have you ever smoked cigarettes? Because most local physicians, truthfully, do not know a whole lot about asbestos diseases, the latency, the limited amount of exposure that can cause disease, and all of those things, are very important into a diagnosis of somebody. And so what we typically see is somebody has breathing problems, they go to the doctor. The doctor usually will say, well, it's caused by smoking, COPD, one of these other types of problems. And so at that point, typically, the individual will continue to have problems, go get a follow-up with their doctor, and that's when they typically might say, hey, we recommend that you get a biopsy or do a CT scan. And obviously a biopsy is where you typically will find a malignancy or a cancer. And in that biopsy, they can also take out some tissue and test it specifically look at it under a microscope to see if there is asbestos fibers in the actual tissue. And if there is asbestos fibers, in fact, in the tissue, that's what's known as pathological asbestosis. So the answer to your question is breathing problems or, like pain in the side or pain in the abdomen. Those are the first things that we typically see.
What about, I'm here in Florida, and we've talked about this before. We had a real bad problem with asbestos was in the sheetrock, and it was, I think, sheetrock that was coming over from China. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, it does, but it's not just the sheetrock, which is unfortunate. That's the only one that we know about. Very recently, asbestos was banned in the United States completely. Up until literally, I think it was about 3 to 6 months ago, you would still find asbestos in various products, brakes, various different adhesives, other products used in the oil industry. They were still using some asbestos products until they were completely banned. Once asbestos was a known hazard, what we started seeing was a lot of products coming in from overseas, typically China, that did use asbestos as a component. Asbestos hasn't been banned as far as I know in China. It has been banned in maybe 30 countries, but not Brazil, not Russia, not China. Very little in the Asian countries. Very, very few have banned it. I think Japan has.
What about Johnson's baby powder? We hear all kinds of advertising with that.
Spectacular question. That is sort of the news of the day for lawyers in my field. I would say recently, but it's been developing over the last 5 years. Over the last 5 years, we have proven as lawyers in my field that Johnson & Johnson's baby powder was contaminated with asbestos all the way up until 2015 and as far back as the 1970s. And this is obviously problematic for Johnson & Johnson because I don't know a person in the United States who hasn't used Johnson & Johnson's baby powder either on their children, on their feet, on their private areas, on their armpits at some time in their life. I think we all used it. Thankfully, not everybody gets an asbestos disease who used it, but there are some who have. And there has been, I'd say my estimate would be about 20 trials against Johnson & Johnson across the country.
That's it?
That's it. There is probably 100,000 pending cases, but there has only been, say, 20 to 25 actual trials that went to a verdict. There's been cases that have settled, that Johnson & Johnson settled, but of those say 20 to 25 cases that have gone to verdict, I would say that the plaintiffs have been successful in proving that Johnson & Johnson caused somebody's mesothelioma in about 15 of those 25 cases. And Johnson & Johnson has been successful in defending those cases in about 40%, or about 10 of those 25 cases would be my estimate. There is one firm I do want to point out, Dean, Omar, Branham, and Shirley. I work very closely with them. The acronym is Dobbs. They are in Texas. They're 3-0 against Johnson & Johnson. They're the ones who had the verdict this past week. The cases are incredibly difficult because you are going back in time, often 40 or 50 years, to show how somebody was exposed. You got to prove that the asbestos.
How do you prove that?
Well, oftentimes you can go on maybe eBay and buy some baby powder from that era. The individual who testifies will testify, this is where I bought it, this is how I used it, this is how often I used it. I remember how much I paid, it was $1.89 or whatever, and you get as much detail from the client as you can. And then we as lawyers, through experts, can prove that there was asbestos. It's for the jury to decide if that exposure actually caused their mesothelioma. And what experts will say that plaintiffs bring into trial is it doesn't take years of exposure, because what you've got to realize is maybe just using baby powder once could be an exposure of 1 million asbestos fibers. That's how fine they are. And so it doesn't take a lot of exposure, but ultimately it's for the jury to decide if that exposure caused the disease. We can only, lay out the case and the evidence the best that we can with the facts that we've got. And that's what that's what I tell clients, that's what I tell defense lawyers, and that's what I tell judges. Just put all the facts on the table and let the jury decide. All this thing about excluding this evidence and hiding that and concealing that, it's a big problem in my litigation. I actually should talk about it for just a minute, since it has been in the news fairly significantly lately. But it is very difficult to prove those cases. Why I want to talk about that for just a moment is there is an article that many people out there may have seen, and I think the headline was Asbestos Law Firm Sued for Billions. And that was a firm in my field. It is the Simmons Hanley Conroy firm. And what the allegations were in that complaint was that they essentially trained their clients to specifically identify one particular product at the exclusion of all other asbestos products, so that they said that their client was only exposed to that one product. This was a Johns Manville asbestos cement pipe, and wasn't exposed to any other product. And what that firm, Simmons Hanley Conroy, purportedly did in multiple cases was they had clients testifying identically. Oh, it had a red stripe, it was white, it was, and the testimony, it was unmistakably similar amongst the clients that it almost screamed fraud. And ultimately what happened was Johns Manville, or JMM as they are known now, sued this law firm, alleging that they effectively presented fraudulent evidence about their client's exposure. And this has been a problem in my litigation for 25 years, as far as I know. because lawyers in my field know that if somebody testifies, I was exposed to XXX product, and in this case, JMM's stuck in a corner, because the risk is you go to trial and you get a $10 million verdict against them, or they've got to settle the case. And if they don't settle and they take it to trial, it still costs them $500,000 to take it to trial. And so when Simmons Hanley Conroy does this in multiple cases, and the whole all of this evidence regarding Simmons Hanley Conroy only came up because an associate attorney working there said, hey, my employer is basically asking me to commit fraud and I don't want to do it. And he sued Simmons Hanley Conroy. And so that case was settled. And when the evidence came up, JMM got their hands on the evidence and ultimately sued Simmons Hanley Conroy. What I think that case will reveal is not only fraud against JMM, but also extensive fraud with bankruptcy trust funds. Because when Simmons Hanley alleged that their client was only exposed to this one JMM product, that meant that they didn't believe their clients were exposed to the 60 asbestos trust funds. But what a firm like Simmons Hanley Conroy unfortunately does, and puts a stain on all of us, is they first present the case and say, my client was only exposed to JMM. And then once JMM settles, they turn around and file 50 bankruptcy claims alleging their clients were exposed to 50 different other asbestos products. And to me, that is fraud. And what it is commonly known as in my field is double dipping. They're first dipping their hand in the solvent defendants to maximize the value, and then dipping their hands in the bankrupt trust funds to maximize value. Now, this wouldn't be fraud if they had alleged from the start, my client was exposed to JMM and all of these other bankrupt company products, but that's not what this firm and other asbestos firms have done over the years. They come in and say, it's all this one company. It's only this company that caused my client's mesothelioma. And those companies have to settle, and then they turn around and file 40 to 50 bankruptcy claims and effectively raid these bankruptcy trust funds. And that, to me, is not only fraud, but it is something that hurts every future victim of asbestos disease, because now these funds, trust funds, are depleted. There is literally billions less in those funds because these lawyers have filed these claims, which I believe are effectively fraud. They've already claimed their only exposure was to this one product. And it really hurts every future victim of asbestos disease. And it really has shown in these trust funds, where a client of mesothelioma maybe used to get $750,000 from his trust fund claims. Because there is so much less money in there, now a victim of mesothelioma may only get $250,000.
Wow, that's a big difference.
And that's 30 years. 30 years these funds are supposed to, it's the next 30 years. Every victim is, in my mind, effectively gets screwed because of what a few lawyers have done. So sorry to take up our time to talk about that.
Hey, Mike, I want to tell you something. I love what you do. And I'm going to tell people, there's, you see all these commercials out there. And first of all, bigger is, I've been doing this for 12 years. Bigger is not better. I'm going to tell I remember Yellow Page ads. Oh, they had a full page ad. So that doesn't mean they're a great law firm, but this is all you do. And, some of these other attorneys, they've got their shingle out there and they do criminal law, personal injury law, bankruptcy law. This is the area that you've concentrated on. And I got to tell you, when a client hires you, they're going to get your full attention, not be taken in by intake, right? Intake.
Yeah, exactly. It's me. That's who they get to meet. Not, oh, we'll send a paralegal out to meet you. One of my secretary will call you.
Right.
It's me. Quick real world story for you that happened this week. Client called me about a year ago, had mesothelioma. Lived in California. I thought they were going to retain me. Lo and behold, about 2 weeks later, I find out that they had retained one of these big national firms. And it's not only a big firm. We recently got a list of the top 10 asbestos filing firms in the country, and this firm was number one. And I was very disappointed because they're in Illinois and the exposure was here in California. And I knew that they would not do as well for the client as I would, but the client retained this big firm because they filed 400 cases this year, and these are the guys for us. Well, lo and behold, that mesothelioma victim dies, and the case did not work out very well while she was alive. But the case continues as a wrongful death case. The children can file a wrongful death case, and as can the husband. Well, lo and behold, the children contact me and say, we should have hired you originally. The firm that we went to in Illinois, I don't know why they took our case to Illinois. It was a California case, and we want to hire you for the wrongful death case. So I've got to now reach out to the firm in Illinois and say, hey, these clients have now hired me. It's a wrongful death case. I now represent them. Can you please send me all of the information from your case? And exactly what I thought was going to happen happened. This firm in Madison County, and you know what? The Gorey law firm, they the biggest firm out there. They filed 400 cases. Come back to me and say, hey, Mike, we've already settled this whole case. We filed all the bankruptcies. There's nothing left for you. Essentially, go away, Mike. We've already settled this whole case. We filed everything. So I come back to them and I say, well, can you send me a list of the companies you've settled with and a list of the bankruptcy claims that you filed so I can take a look and evaluate it? Because I knew that there was no way that they had sued the proper local companies because they're in Madison County and the exposure was in California. So lo and behold, they send me this big list of bankruptcy claims they filed and a fairly big list of a small list of defendants who they settled with. And I looked at it and immediately I could see two bankrupt companies easily worth $750,000 that they never filed, they had never filed. And what's interesting about this Gorey firm is I worked with them 10 years ago and filed these very same claims for them. And it tells me that once they stopped working with me, that they have never filed these claims since, because this case, it was the most valuable trust fund, easily, like I said, worth probably $750,000.
Wow.
And they weren't even filing it in this case. And I'm going to file it for this client. And I can go back to these clients and say, hey, Gorey has said they've settled everything, but I know there's still money in this case for you. Okay, so I'm going to take it on, even though you hired them first, even though they said they settled everything. I know that there is more out there for you. And so I am ultimately going to file these claims. But it also tells me that this big firm, Gorey, who I used to work with, and I used to file these very valuable claims for them until they took them back in-house, never really took them in-house, but just never filed them. And This is not only the biggest firm, this is the biggest firm for like the past 10 years. So if it's 400 cases this year and they missed it in this case, how many other cases have they missed?
Right.
And then over the last 10 years, how many? And that's why a local firm, somebody who knows the defendants and knows the companies, that is how you are going to get your best results, not these big, massive firms.
Well, I got to tell you, I am glad that we have you. Give everybody how they can reach you.
My telephone number is 1-800-970-DUST. That is 1-800-970-3878. That's my call center. You can call me direct at my office, 415-895-5175. I also am very responsive by email, which is my last, it's a long one, so get ready. My last name, Mandelbrot, Mandel, B as in boy, ROT, at Asbestos Legal Center, just like it sounds, .org. AsbestosLegalCenter.org. And I would appreciate any questions, any phone calls, any concerns. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Mike will be back again with us next month. Michael, thank you so much. Your show goes by so fast. There's so much great information out there. We'll see you again next month.
Sorry to do so much talking, Steve. Great talking to you.
Yeah,
see you next month. I appreciate it. Take care now.
You too. That's Michael Mandelbrot, great attorney. We're going to go to break. We'll come back. We got more. Hold on there. We'll be right back.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.